Let's break it down straight from the hill to your hometown. No spin, no hype, just facts we find. AI's on the case, no truth left behind. Laws are written, deals are made. Who's got your back, who's throwing shade? We cut through the noise, decode the text, keeping it real. Congress in context, Congress in context, shining the light, breaking it down so you know what's right. Policies, votes, who's working for you? We bring the facts, the power is you.
Welcome in, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're digging into the Congressional Record from February 26, 2025.
Ooh, exciting.
So buckle up. It's Congress in context today.
All right. I like
We're
it.
talking budget showdowns, Elon Musk making waves, and maybe a little bit of heartwarming stuff, too, just to balance things out.
It's like we're getting a sneak peek behind the curtain of all the political theater.
Right.
All those forces shaping how decisions get made, those different ideologies clashing. And, you know, we can't forget about the real-life stories that are woven into every single law they're trying to pass.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to unpack all of it.
It is.
Let's jump right into the chaos. First up, the budget brawl. There's a proposed budget resolution that's causing a lot of tension, especially when it comes to potential cuts to Medicaid.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there.
What do you think's at the heart of this debate?
Well, it all boils down to how we define the role of government, right? Like, how much responsibility does the government have in supporting its citizens? We're seeing those differing visions play out right in front of us in these budget arguments.
Yeah, makes sense. Representatives LaMalfa and Cherflos McCormick had quite a face-off about this.
They did.
Representative LaMalfa, a Republican, is claiming that the Democrats are, spreading misinformation and that there aren't actually any Medicaid cuts in this budget resolution.
Ah, yes, the classic control the narrative tactic. You emphasize certain points and kind of downplay others. By focusing on the fact that there aren't explicit cuts laid out in the resolution, he's hoping to sort of sidestep the worries about the potential impact on Medicaid down the road.
Clever. But Representative Cherflos McCormick wasn't buying it. She brought the receipts, pointing out the potential for $880 billion in cuts. And she shared some really powerful stories from her district in Florida.
That's smart.
I know.
By bringing in these personal experiences, she's grounding this massive, complex budget debate in reality. Suddenly, it's not just abstract numbers, it's about people's lives.
Right. She talked about Reverend Latifah Griffin and her son, who needs Medicaid for his cerebral palsy treatment. It was really moving to hear.
Yeah, it makes you stop and think about what's really at stake with these decisions.
It does.
It makes you ask, can we, as a society, be fiscally responsible and still protect our most vulnerable citizens?
Speaking of big personalities, let's talk about Elon Musk.
Yeah.
He jumped into this already heated situation by publicly demanding that all federal workers justify their jobs.
Oh, yeah. He definitely knows how to make a statement.
He does.
This whole move taps into that distrust a lot of people have of government bureaucracy.
Yeah.
It's this idea that the government is bloated and inefficient. That's a strong narrative, and Musk is definitely using it to pressure the federal workforce.
Well, Representative Brown didn't hold back. She accused Musk of being unelected and unaccountable. She even went so far as to call him out for, let's just say, some inconsistencies in his own track record with spending cuts.
It's a really interesting question about, private wealth versus public policy. Like, Musk might not be an elected official.
Right.
But with all his wealth and his platform, he has a huge voice. He can definitely shape national conversations.
Absolutely. Representative Tonko chimed in, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he questioned if Musk even has the experience or really understands government enough to be making these pronouncements.
It boils down to, expertise versus influence. In this world where information travels so fast and anyone can be a public figure, how do we decide who actually has the authority to shape policies? Whose voices should we really be listening to?
Big questions. And then Representative Tlaib took the floor and shared a heartbreaking story.
Oh.
It was about 2 children in her district who froze to death because they couldn't get housing resources after HUD worker layoffs. Yeah, it's a stark reminder that every single one of these decisions has consequences, real-world consequences.
When we talk about government waste, it's easy to think of it as this abstract thing, but stories like that really put a face to it. It forces us to confront the difficult trade-offs that are involved when we talk about cutting government spending.
It does. Okay, moving on to a classic environmental battle. Methane emissions.
Hmm.
We've got the Democrats pushing for stricter regulation,
Of course.
and the Republicans worried about what that'll do to industry. It's an age-old debate.
It really is.
This isn't really just about methane, though, is it?
No, it's much bigger than
No.
that. It's about balancing environmental protection with economic growth. And who ends up paying the price for that balance?
Right. The Methane Emissions Reduction Program and the proposed methane polluter fee are right at the center of this fight.
Makes sense.
Democrats, like Representative Griffith, see this as a necessary step. They want to hold companies accountable for this really potent greenhouse gas.
Notice how they're using the word fee instead of tax.
Well, yeah.
It's all very intentional. They want to emphasize that the program is set up to incentivize companies to make changes.
Right. Representative Griffith pointed out that companies can avoid the fee completely if they meet certain emission standards.
Exactly.
Kind of like a carrot and stick approach to reducing methane.
I like that analogy. It's a classic example of how you can design policy to encourage certain behaviors, not just punish the bad ones. But the success of these policies really depends on the details of how they're put into practice.
Good point. Republicans, like Representative Stauber, aren't convinced. They see this fee as another weight on American energy companies, one that'll end up hurting families by raising energy costs.
It's a compelling argument, especially for those feeling the pinch of rising living costs. It taps into that fear about economic security and those potential sacrifices we have to make between protecting the environment and keeping things affordable.
Then you've got Senator Whitehouse, a big advocate for climate action, who brought some pretty powerful visuals into the mix.
Oh, what did he do?
He showed satellite images of massive methane leaks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty impactful way of showing that this isn't some invisible problem. It's a real, tangible threat.
I love when they use visuals like that.
Me too.
It makes that abstract idea of methane emissions much more real and immediate, especially in a world that's so visual. It helps people connect with the issue emotionally.
Definitely. He also went into the history of the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, highlighting how the fossil fuel industry has been fighting these kinds of regulations for years.
Which reminds us that big industries can have a lot of sway over policy decisions. You have to understand the historical context to really grasp why we're still struggling with these issues today.
Okay, let's take a breather from all these legislative battles for a minute.
Okay.
Let's appreciate some of the heartwarming moments from the Congressional Record. It's not all doom and gloom up there on Capitol Hill.
Right.
What do you think about those?
It's easy to get caught up in those partisan clashes, but these are the moments that show us that Congress is also a place where we celebrate what's good in our communities. It's a place to recognize those achievements of individuals and groups all over the country.
Yeah, exactly. There were tributes to so many amazing people and groups. The Mo Better Jaguars, a youth football team that won a national championship. Jerry Kaminsky Sr., who was a dedicated public servant. The Tucson Rodeo, they're celebrating 100 years. Then John Coleman, a really well-loved political reporter. And Dr. Patricia Pulliam, a pioneering journalist and activist.
It's like looking through a window into the heart of America. It reminds us about all the values we cherish: community, hard work, resilience, giving back to others. They're all reflected in those tributes. It shows that, yeah, we have our differences, but we also share this common humanity. And we want to celebrate those who make a difference in the world.
I love that. Okay, let's switch gears and see what's happening in the Senate. They were tackling some pretty big issues, especially when it comes to energy and the economy.
Yeah, the Senate tends to take a broader view on those national issues.
Right.
Because senators represent whole states, they have to consider a much wider range of interests and viewpoints. It's always fascinating to see how those dynamics play out in their discussions.
One of the big hot-button topics was President Trump's declaration of a national energy emergency. Senator Murkowski from Alaska surprised some folks by supporting it. She cited the specific energy challenges her state faces, particularly in those remote communities.
That highlights how important it is to understand those regional differences when we're trying to craft national policies. Something that might be super important in one state might not even be on the radar in another. Our elected officials have to understand and be able to respond to those differences.
Absolutely. Senator Shaheen from New Hampshire had a different take. She criticized the declaration, calling it a political move to favor the fossil fuel industry. She argued it weakens environmental protections and overlooks the potential of clean energy.
It's a classic example of how divided we are on energy policy.
It is.
Republicans often push for more domestic production of fossil fuels, while Democrats tend to prioritize the transition to cleaner sources. It's a debate about the future of our energy, and the stakes are really high.
Then, Senator Whitehouse joined the conversation with a really powerful speech. He linked climate change directly to the economic struggles of the insurance industry. He described this looming crisis as insurance companies grapple with more frequent and more severe weather disasters.
What I find so striking is how he's connecting climate change, which we usually think of as an environmental issue, to very real economic consequences that are already affecting people's lives.
Exactly.
He's making the argument that climate change isn't some far-off threat. It's happening now, and it's costing us.
He even talked about the situation in Florida. Insurance rates are going through the roof, and insurers are pulling out.
Oh, wow.
It's creating a real estate crisis. It's a sobering reminder of the real-world impacts of climate change.
It just goes to show how decisions made in Washington ripple outward, often hitting local communities the hardest. It underscores how interconnected these issues really are, and we need solutions that take all those connections into account.
So, amidst all the political maneuvering, we're also seeing glimmers of bipartisanship. It seems even in these divided times, they can find some common ground, at least every now and then.
It's important to highlight those moments.
It is.
They remind us that even with all the ideological differences, our elected officials can actually work together. They can address those shared concerns and actually try to find solutions that benefit the entire nation. It gives you a little bit of hope.
A little bit. One example is the Benjamin Franklin Statue Placement Act, which passed with support from both sides of the aisle.
Interesting. What was that about?
It seems everyone agrees that Ben Franklin deserves a more prominent statue in the Capitol.
It's symbolic, sure, but it's still a step in the right direction.
It is.
It shows a shared sense of history and national identity, and it reminds us that even those seemingly small gestures require cooperation to happen. It means finding common ground is possible, even in these super polarized times.
Absolutely. And there's another moment of unity, the unanimous support to increase the pension for Medal of Honor recipients.
That's really heartwarming.
Yeah, it really shows a shared respect and gratitude for those who've served our country with incredible courage.
It's a powerful reminder that some things are just bigger than partisan politics. Honoring those who've made sacrifices for our nation unites us. It's a moment of collective appreciation for their service.
So we've covered a lot. Budget battles, Elon Musk stirring things up, the methane debate, heartwarming moments, and even a little bit of bipartisanship. What do you think? What's the big takeaway from all of this? What did we learn from this deep dive into the Congressional Record?
You know, what strikes me is how Congress is like a mirror. It reflects all the complexities and contradictions of our society. We see our values debated, our divisions laid bare, and our struggles to find solutions.
It really does feel like we're seeing it all play out in real time. The tension between fiscal responsibility and social welfare.
Right.
The influence of powerful individuals and corporations. The urgency of climate change. And that enduring spirit of American communities. It's a lot to take in.
But we have to remember that these aren't just theoretical policy debates happening in some far-off place.
Right.
They have real-world consequences for all of us.
Exactly. What Congress decides affects our lives in so many ways, from healthcare to the air we breathe to how safe we feel in our communities.
Exactly. And what's also striking is how powerful storytelling can be in shaping these policy debates. We saw representatives and senators use personal anecdotes to bring these issues to life, to make us remember that behind every policy decision, there are real people whose lives are going to be changed.
It's so true.
Those stories are what help us connect to these complicated issues on a human level. They resonate with us in a way that statistics just can't. They remind us that we're dealing with human beings.
Absolutely.
What?
Representative Cherflis McCormick talking about families who depend on Medicaid.
Right.
Representative Tlaib sharing that story about the children who froze to death. Senator Whitehouse describing dying coral reefs. Those stories stay with you.
They really do. They make something abstract, concrete. They make something complex, relatable, and they bring something distant close to home. And they force us to consider the human cost of these political decisions. They make us ask ourselves, what kind of society do we actually want? What are our values, and how do we put those values into practice?
This deep dive has also highlighted how important it is to stay informed and engaged with what's going on in Congress.
Absolutely. It's easy to feel overwhelmed with how much information is coming out of there.
It is.
But we have to understand what our representatives are doing and why.
Because knowledge is power. An informed citizenry is what keeps a democracy healthy. By staying informed, we can hold our elected officials accountable, make sure our voices are heard, and fight for policies we believe in.
Exactly. And there are so many resources out there to help us stay in the loop. Websites like congress.gov and govtrack.us
Oh, I love those.
let you keep track of bills, committee meetings, and votes.
You can also sign up for newsletters from your representatives, follow them on social media, or contact their offices directly to share your thoughts. Don't underestimate how much a phone call or an email to your representative can do. They do pay attention to what their constituents say, especially when it comes from engaged, informed citizens.
That's so true.
It's also important to talk to people who see things differently. We need to be able to listen to each other, try to understand where we're all coming from. That's how we find common ground and work towards solutions together.
I couldn't agree more.
We've seen firsthand how partisan gridlock can stall progress, but we've also seen those moments of bipartisanship. And those moments give us hope. It reminds us that even with all our differences, we still have common goals. We all want to make our country a better place.
We do. It's up to all of us to demand that our elected officials put their differences aside and actually work together to solve the challenges facing our nation. And it's up to us to stay informed, stay engaged, and be part of that process. It really makes you think, about how these decisions have a ripple effect. What might seem like a theoretical policy debate back in Washington can have a huge impact on people's lives, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of miles away.
So true. And speaking of ripple effects, there was something interesting I noticed that popped up a bunch of times in the Congressional Record. It's this back and forth between national priorities and those very specific concerns of individual districts.
Right, that constant struggle of representing both.
Exactly.
It's like they're walking a political tightrope, trying to balance the needs of the entire country with the very real, very urgent needs of their constituents back home.
It's exactly that. We saw it in the Medicaid debate. The overall budget is important, of course, but the potential impact on, hundreds of thousands of people in Representative Cherflis McCormick's district was palpable.
It reminds us that these decisions made in D.C. don't just stay there. They affect the whole country, and often it's the local communities that feel those consequences the most.
Makes you wonder, how do we bridge that gap? How do we connect national policy with that local impact?
That's the million-dollar question. It highlights how important it is that Congress represents a diversity of voices and perspectives. The more our representatives actually reflect the people they're serving, the better they'll understand and be able to address the unique needs of those different communities.
Makes sense. It also makes me think about how we can create policies that are flexible enough to be adapted to different regional needs.
Right, because a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't cut it in a country as big and diverse as ours.
Definitely not.
You've hit on something crucial here. Policymaking isn't just about setting these big national goals. It's about creating ways for those policies to adapt to different local contexts. And that means really understanding the challenges and opportunities that each community is facing.
And this whole idea came up again when the Senate was discussing energy policy. Senator Murkowski supporting that National Energy Emergency Declaration was directly related to the energy affordability crisis in rural Alaska.
It shows how much local context can shape someone's stance on a national policy issue. What's a major concern in one state might not even register in another, and our elected officials have to recognize and respond to those differences.
It reminds us that energy policy, like so many policy areas, isn't black and white. There's no magic bullet that'll work for every state or community.
And that's why these debates are so important. It's about hearing different perspectives, understanding the complexity of these issues, and looking at them from different angles.
Absolutely. This whole dynamic got me thinking about how people can actually advocate for their local issues on a national stage.
That's where civic engagement is so vital. Voting isn't enough. It's about actively participating in the political process, making your voice heard, and making sure your local perspective is part of the conversation when those big decisions are being made on a national level.
All right, so that might mean going to town hall meetings, writing to your representatives, or maybe organizing with others in your community who share your concerns.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to connect your local experiences with those bigger national conversations. It's about holding your elected officials accountable, making sure they're representing you, and making sure they understand how their decisions are going to affect your community.
Okay, so as we start wrapping up this deep dive, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
Sounds good.
What are we seeing here?
We're seeing a nation grappling with fundamental questions about who we are, what we believe in, and where we're going. We're trying to figure out how to balance individual freedom with the common good, how to navigate between tradition and progress, and how to make sure everyone has the chance to thrive.
It's a messy process, this whole democracy thing.
It is.
But it also shows that our government is designed to be responsive to us. It's meant to reflect what we need and what we hope for.
Right. It's always evolving.
Mhm.
And we have to keep participating, keep pushing to make sure it truly represents us and serves our best interests. And as you continue to explore and learn more about these issues, think about this. How can you contribute? How can you make a difference in your community, in your state, maybe even nationally? It starts with staying informed, having open conversations, and taking action on the things that matter most to you.
It might mean just staying informed, following what's happening, or maybe it means having those difficult conversations with people who have different views, trying to understand each other, trying to find some common ground.
And for some, it might mean taking that next step and getting more directly involved in politics. Maybe volunteering for a campaign, contacting your representatives, even running for office yourself. There are so many ways to make your voice heard and be a part of shaping the future of our country.
This deep dive has been a journey, hasn't it?
It has.
We've gone from those high-stakes budget fights and environmental debates to moments of celebrating our communities and those inspiring examples of people working together. And through it all, we've been reminded that our individual voices have power and that being active citizens is crucial to creating a democracy that truly reflects who we are.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one last thought. The Congressional Record is more than just a record of what happened in the past. It's a living document. It's a testament to the experiment that is American democracy. It's a reminder that our system isn't perfect, but it's ours to shape, to improve, to protect. And that responsibility belongs to each and every one of us.
So think about what you've heard today. What stood out to you? What made you curious? And what are you going to do to stay involved, to stay engaged in shaping the future of our nation? The answers to those questions aren't in the Congressional Record. They're within each of you, the citizens who are the heart of our democracy.
Your voices matter. Your actions matter. And the future of our nation depends on you continuing to be a part of this conversation about who we are, what we stand for, and what kind of world we want to create together.
It's like we took this whirlwind tour of American democracy, saw all the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right. All the disagreements, those little glimmers of people coming together, the powerful speeches, all those strategies, the heartbreaking stories, and those inspiring acts of kindness, all packed into one day in Congress.
And as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I'm left with this question. What does it all actually mean? Like, what can we take away from this day that helps us make sense of this crazy political world?
Well, I think a big reminder is that democracy, it's not a one-time thing. It's not like you just show up, cast a vote, and you're done.
Right.
It's messy, it's flawed, and it needs our attention all the time.
Yeah. We got to stay informed, talk to each other, hold our leaders accountable, and fight for what we believe in.
Exactly. And it's about knowing that our voices matter. Even with all the noise and craziness in politics, every single one of us can make a difference. We can shape the conversation and help build a fairer, more just world.
So before we go, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
Oh, I like that. A call to action.
Exactly. What are you going to do, inspired by what you heard today, to get involved in our democracy? Will you call your representatives, join a local group, talk to someone who disagrees with you?
Maybe it's even simpler than that. Maybe it's staying informed, having those tough conversations with family and friends, or maybe just thinking about what you believe in and how that lines up with what's happening in politics.
Whatever you choose, remember this. Democracy needs us to participate. It's not a spectator sport. We're all part of this, and we're all working, hopefully, toward a better future together.
We are.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of American democracy. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep engaging.